Sala Falava, Malo Elele, and welcome to the Reads with Rosa podcast. I'm really excited to introduce today's inspirational guest. She values mentoring and supporting emerging leaders, exploring strategies for values-based and culture-centered narrative building, and immersing in Tongan and Pacifica culture and language epistemology. As a Tongan woman, she is resilient and a leader in her own right. With 15 years of experience in community based work across nonprofit spaces, advocating for advancing the rights of Pacific Islanders. Her advocacy work is rooted in community driven approaches and nurtured through the unrelenting encouragement, investment, and belief of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander elders, leaders, and the women of color who have mentored her. One of the hats that she currently wears is California Program Director at Asian American Futures. AAF is an organization that envisions a future in which all Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are valued as essential parts of the American narrative. It is my honor to welcome to the show the amazing Alisi Tulua. Woohoo! Malo, how are you, sis? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan, so it's an honor for me to be here with you.
Likewise, I am so excited to have you here. I know you've had super busy schedules, so it means a lot that you've just taken this time out to be with us here. How are things in your part of the world?
Hectic. I think that's probably the best word right now. Um, when I think about my world, that is really the majority of it is the work that I do, and so I'm currently not at home, and I just finished a 3-day retreat with a group of Pacific Islander leaders in Southern California. And so there's a sense of inspiration and newness and building and coalescing, and so and that's a little bit of a light of hope in the midst of like everything that's going on in the world that is impacting all communities across the world, and particularly as Indigenous people, the way that we see ourselves. And so, of course, like that's happening. And then in this country, in America, there's a lot of chaos around, just what's happening with the complicity in the war that's happening. Well, not the war, but what's happening in Palestine. And there's just a lot of like uproar, and it feels like revolution because a lot of people are in the streets, and so there are a lot of different things happening. So yeah, when I think about what's happening in my world, it's all of that put together. But I'm glad to have this moment of pause to talk with you. So yeah, thank you.
So before we get into our talanoa, I already have so many questions going at 100 miles an hour in my head after hearing you share about your world at this moment. But I do like to ask guests to begin with a self-introduction, shout out your villages, your people. Go ahead, Alisi.
Thank you. Te tomo whamalo atu he whaingamali e kwen ko ke tuku mai ke o kau. Whakataha mo koe he talanoani. I just want to thank you first and foremost for the opportunity to have this conversation. And as I said, I'm a fan of your work, and so it's an honor for me to be here. My name's Alisi, and I currently live in unceded territory that belongs to the Costanoan Ohlone Esselen people, currently called Monterey, California. I am a Tongan immigrant. My parents moved here when I was 13, so I was born and raised in Tonga. My father is from Nukunuku in Vatu'u, and my mother is from Bangai Hapai, Kolomoto'a, and grew up in Hatteiho. So that's a little bit of my lineage. What's part of who I am is really made up of, uh, five brothers who loved me and spoiled me as their only sister, but also beyond that, a really large family that my parents raised. I may be biologically theirs, but they raised a lot of other children that have shaped my life. And so credits to them because I was one of the younger ones. And so those are the people that have contributed to my life. And I currently, as you said in your introduction, I work in as a program director with the Asian American Futures. Uh, but I'm really rooted in our Pacific Islander nonprofit space and community-based work, and have spent about almost 15 to 20 years doing that. So I'm really rooted in some of those organizations and the elders that have mentored me in that space. So that's a little bit more about who I am.
Aloha, Pito. I was wondering, when we think about advocacy work, when we think about social justice, from a young age, were you aware of what social justice looked like, or at least having a voice to speak up or speak out about things that bothered you as a teenager? Like, I'm just wondering, where are the roots of your passion for community, for building, for organizing, for just showing kindness, caring for others?
I was not. I did not know anything about social justice. This was
Mm,
my journey in that work has been in community
mm,
as part of my own education about what is my role in contributing to the larger community in a meaningful way. However, I grew up in a home. It's funny. I was just telling this story to somebody else last night. Um, but I grew up in a home. I have three older brothers, two younger brothers, and like I said, I grew up in a home where my parents raised so many other kids. But one key message that I kept hearing them say as huge advocates for education is to, in Tongan is mo ako pe mo fok mga ke mo aunga ke whanua. So basically it means go to school, come back and work and contribute to the whanua, like give back to the
mm,
people, give back to the land, give back to the community. And they were never saying this to me directly, but I heard them tell all the other older kids that this is what they have to do and this is why education is important. Um, so I think I kind of internalized that message. When I think about learning about social justice, uh, I, I it resonated with me because it aligned with a lot of the values that I was raised with anyway. One key thing that I remember really vividly is being taught about how important it is to stand up for people. Um, and it's just like a message as a kid, like it was this like akonaki, this being taught in the home about like if you see somebody being wronged and you stand by, you're contributing to the wrong that's being done. And so like don't just stand there and watch something like that happen. If somebody this is like as a kid, right? Like if you see somebody being bullied, stand up for them. If you see a fight, stop it, right? Like so just these very basic things. Another really big message that I remember growing up with is I don't know what it is in English. The English word doesn't quite capture it, but like
mm,
don't be a person that is manuki. Manuki means like to bully or to make fun of or to pick on. There was a really important message that my parents raised us with was like not to be those kind of people. Don't laugh at people if something
mm,
like if they fall or if they do something wrong or if they make a mistake, like don't mock them. I don't know why that was so important to me as a child and it stood out to me, but when I was introduced to the world of social justice work and this was after I got my master's degree in a completely different field.
Mm,
Um, it just reminded me of those really foundational values that and messages that I clung on to as a kid about standing up for people, uh, like helping somebody when they need it. So yeah, I was never formally
mm,
educated around this area, and I envy my friends and my colleagues who had an ethnic studies or sociology background when they got to explore a lot of these kinds of topics. Like that was brand new language to me, and I really learned it in community from other people in community, from
mm,
other scholars that I was in community with who took Pacific Studies classes. My formal education was so far away from that. And so it has really been something that I learned as an adult,
mm.
and that I felt resonated with me and the kinds of values that I was raised with. And so I just became really immersed in it as an adult.
Mm. I mean, in hindsight, like you aspired to become a doctor, you studied biochem, you have a master's in biology. Like in hindsight, looking back, are you now thinking, oh, that wasn't right? Or now with your experiences in terms of, as a community strategist, doing the advocacy work, are you now kind of looking back on your journey? Um, at university and go, oh, that was a bit dodgy. Why didn't I question that? Or because you now have the language to perhaps, and like you said, that was such a different field. But I was just wondering if you do have those recollections now in the present, like,
Yeah, I think less so in my education, but more in my migration here as a young
mm,
person and my family moving directly to an area that is largely white and affluent.
mm,
And coming in as a teenager, I didn't recognize any of these things. I think like the concept of racism was really new to me, or it was not a concept that was part of my world having grown up in Tonga. Like that was, you don't think about those things growing up in a community that's like homogeneously Tongan. Of course there are variations in there, but like I guess my point is when you grow up in the islands that those some of those social concepts are not necessarily part of your environment. And
mm,
so in hindsight, having learned about all the isms,
mm,
um, in this work, it gave me language for some of the things that I didn't make sense to me when I was in coming to school with these white kids and like some of the things that I felt was wrong, but I didn't have language for.
mm,
Like feeling picked on by my history teacher, um, because I didn't understand things as quickly as she'd like in the moment when she's asking me questions in class. And I'm like, and I think back and I go, first of all, I was like I spoke English, but it was like the English I learned in school in Tonga,
mm.
So it takes me a while to process it. And so yeah, I when I think back about some of those experiences, I recognize it. And I also think back to um, my education even in an area that is, the hard sciences,
Mm.
how there's how much racism is in those spaces and in the institution, um and how I never questioned those things. I always say that I was attracted to the hard sciences because I like facts.
You like the hard data, don't you? You want
Exactly.
hard data, the facts, the statistics, all of that.
like I can run this experiment and prove that I'm right or prove that I'm wrong.
Right.
It was very like black and white almost. I didn't have any other analysis around that, and it wasn't
Mm,
until like as an adult having come into this work and learning about some of these social issues that I was like, oh yeah, that's not right. Like when they have these conversations about experimentation, like the way that like racism as an institution in scientific research, right? Things like that.
Mm,
I never questioned that because I didn't have a framework for any of it, even as a college student, because I didn't. Honestly, there the requirements for college to get a degree, right? They want you to be a well-rounded student,
mm,
so you have to take classes in all these different areas. And of course, I was required to take an ethnic studies class, but being the maybe arrogantly confident person in like just sticking to the sciences, I think I took an ethnic studies class around like medicine, like racism in medicine or something like that.
mm,
It always had to be related to the sciences in some way. But yeah, so there were glimmers of exposure, but I didn't have enough to really think twice about any of it, right? Like my world was 95% biochemistry and
mm,
biology, and then 5% something else. And so even when I would hear some of those whispers, I didn't really think about it because I didn't have the context for it necessarily.
mm.
Um, yeah, but I'm talking about this and it's reminding me of one of those moments uh, of like moments of clarity was in college. Dr. Haunani K. Trask came and spoke at our school, and
Wow.
and I had heard her name, but I didn't really know who she was. I knew that she was a leader in the Hawaiian sovereignty movement. That was basically all I knew, and even that, as my understanding of who she was enough for me to be like, oh yeah, I agree with that. Like I agree with Hawaiian sovereignty as a Tongan person. So I that was enough for me to go and listen to her. And I talk about that going to that lecture as one of my points of activation, right? Or one of the points where like a window was opened in my mind about like, oh, what there are a lot of things that are wrong here.
Mm,
Because it was the first time that I ever heard her speak and was really exposed to her work. And so she talked about Palestine.
mm,
That was one of the things that really stood out to me because my best friend in college is Palestinian. And so I was surprised when I heard her talk about Palestine. That wasn't part of anything I was relating to Hawaiian sovereignty or to my Pacific Islanderness. Um, and I remember one of the other messages that she talked about was like, there's a flight that leaves Hawaii every hour or something like that. Pick one and leave my island. Like something like that.
mm,
She said something to that effect, and it really made me think about, like I hadn't really thought about indigenous rights of the Hawaiian people to their own land and what America and Western capitalism has done
mm,
to Hawaii. And I didn't even extend that to even connect it to Guam or American Samoa. That came way later in my exposure and my journey of learning about some of these like systems and the ways that they have wronged our people. But that was a point of clarity and exposure in college was when Haunani K. Trask came to speak. And I really I went to that talk. I knew I was gonna go to that talk, but I really went to that talk because I was mad at the Hawaii Club.
Just let it
Um,
out, sis. Just speak it. Just oh.
because I saw her talk promoted, and I wasn't in the Hawaii Club, but there were two Samoan girls. They were younger than me, but they were in the Hawaii Club, and they had tried to get me to join the club because there wasn't a Pacific Islander organization on campus. But I was like, no, like I don't even I remember the first day that I saw the Hawaii Club, they had a table one of the days where like you get to learn about the different clubs on campus. And I remember going up to the table like hella excited to be like, oh my gosh, Hawaii Club. And
Mm.
all the girls just kind of looked at me. And in my mind, I was like, first of all, I don't. Are you even Hawaiian? Like, I was resentful that they weren't being friendly to me.
Right, right.
So when these two young Samoan students came in and they were excited to join the club, and they were like, "You should come," and I was like, "No, I'll just support you two from the outside."
The
But
outside
they,
looking in.
yeah, so they both like took up like officer positions. They were really active, wonderful. But they ended up not promoting Haunani's
Mm.
talk on campus. And so I sent this scathing email to the president. And I was like, you're called the Hawaii Club, and why aren't
Mm.
you promoting this prominent figure in
Mm.
like for the community? And they said because she's too controversial. And I was like,
Ah.
and I had the audacity, and I learned now also was corrected by some of my Hawaiian friend, my Kanaka friends, because I told them I was like, you should take Hawaii off the name of your club. You don't deserve it. So
The good old college days.
it's terrible. But now I'm like, okay, the Tongan should never fix her mouth to say things like that to the Hawaii club. I learned, but anyway, yeah, those are some moments in college that I think like really started to open and expose my mind to a world outside of what I was studying, and a world that, some of these lessons around like stand up for the people who have
Mm.
less power, right? Like some of those moments, I think um those kinds of exposures stuck with me, and so then when I came in the community and learned so much more, I was like, oh, I remember that moment. That was that. So I always tell that story as part of like my activation story. Like that was one of the points in my life where I recognized being like politically active, if you want to, if or
Mm.
politically activated, if you want to call it that.
Wow, politically activated. I like that. I like that. I feel like earlier on today, I was chatting to someone who is from the Midwest, uh, and she was sharing about um, the Pacific Island experience, like Pacific Islander stories, narratives in the US, and like moving from Tonga to the US, like what did you know about other Pacific Islanders? Like, you moved to a predominantly white area, but were you in community, your family in community with other Tongans, with other Pacific Islanders? Like, what were some of the stories that you knew about that migration from Tonga to the US, or to New Zealand, or to Australia?
I was so young. I feel I was 13, so I
Mm.
feel like I was way too young to even like think about what that meant.
Mm.
But what I knew was that my I had already had family that had migrated here in the late 60s, in the early 70s, in the 80s. And so I just, my dad has 8 siblings, and all of them had migrated here. My dad was the only one that stayed back in Tonga. And so I had some understanding, I guess. I had some level of understanding of there are Pacific Islanders that are in the US, and my family's there. And like when my family would come back to Tonga to visit, or my cousins would come to visit, I understood it to be a completely different world. I at least knew that it was a very different world. Because like you had a cousin that got sent back to Tonga for a whole year because they were getting into too much trouble, as punishment. And so I knew that it was just a world that I couldn't imagine. I was also a big fan of like high school, American high school stories.
Ah.
So I grew up reading The Babysitter's Club, huge, huge fan. Um, my brothers, like I'd read my brother's Hardy Boys books, and Nancy Drew books, and Sweet Valley High. So I became obsessed with like American high school experience because I just imagined it from reading these books.
Mm.
And so when we moved here, so we moved here. We moved to this predominantly white area, and the schools that I went to were exactly what I imagined. It was, like,
People
and then
hanging by their lockers.
yes, yes, like
Beautiful outfits.
like I watched Karate Kid. I'm sure like I memorized the English words that I knew from that movie. And so that was like what I imagined high school was. Um, and it was like that. And what I failed to really know, like, what I didn't know was not all the high schools are white,
Mm,
like, because there was no diversity in my school. Also, that's like those are the kinds of things that I saw in movies about American high schools. So I thought that that's how every high school was. I didn't even know, because even though we moved to this area, there were other Pacific Islander community. There was a larger Samoan community there, because it's an area where there's an army base, and
uh,
so there were Samoan families that had, a Samoan community that grew in that area. There was a smaller Tongan community, but enough for there to be a Methodist church for the Tongan community. Um, and so, but I didn't go to school with them. They went to a couple other schools nearby. It wasn't until college that when I went to the local community college and was around the other Samoans that were in the other schools and the other Tongans that went to the other schools, and I was like, "You all have been here this whole time? Why didn't I know? Like, why didn't I ever why didn't we ever hang out even as high schoolers?"
mm,
I would only see them when we would play against each other in
mm,
sports or something. But it was really, my parents would try to shelter us from, I think it is, well, not I think, it is why they moved us to this predominantly white area. They tried to shelter us from having learned from the experiences of our other family that had moved here decades earlier. Like my family really having some of the origin stories in like Tongan Crip gang, so there
uh,
there are these experiences that some of my early family that came out here were caught in, and so they tried to shelter us from that. They tried to, so it was, I think it was part of the reason, because they came out here a year earlier to find a place to move us, and so that they ended up settled where we are now. But they definitely decided against living in LA, against living in San Francisco in the Bay Area, because to them, they didn't want us to get caught up in what some of the issues were that some of our Pacific Islander
mm.
young people were caught up in, right? I didn't have any other understanding about that, except that they were trying to shelter us from that to keep us focused on going to school and getting an education, which is the purpose of our migration. But I don't even know if I answered your question.
You did, you did. So then, um, I I'm I feel like out of New Zealand, at least, we hear, we there are shows that are created, that are written, stories that are written about the migration experience, about um, our experiences as marginalized communities in Aotearoa. And I was wondering, the Pacific Islander migration stories or the Tongan migration stories, are there people uh, writing these stories? Or at least, I mean, I have had people on the show who have, they've written short films. It's amazing to see the work that is being done. And I wonder, in terms of the area where you grew up and where you're from, are there people doing that work out there? Because that is a form of advocacy as well. Bringing our stories, bringing your stories, uh, your cousin's stories, bringing it to light and helping people understand in other communities that it's not just the athlete's story. No disrespect to our amazing athletes and our performers out there, like naturally we're we're arts and sporty people, but are there people in your communities who are writing our narratives, not someone else who is not from our communities, but are you seeing that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely we have a lot of amazing scholars that are doing that work, that their their um their journey into their scholarship is really inspired by like learning more and documenting and capturing
Mm,
and then sharing back some of those stories because um because it's not told otherwise.
mm,
um I know for me, but of course, like it's not as powerful as what you see in Aotearoa and the kind of visibility that like Pacifica community have over there. Um, we're always really inspired by what happens there, and we kind of like, oh, we want to do what they're doing over there. But I can say that definitely our scholars are the ones that are kind of at the forefront of doing that. Like we have some schools that are now starting to have Pacific Island Studies programs,
mm,
or at least have a couple of Pacific Island Studies classes. And so those kinds of stories get captured there, and it's our professors that like went and did their PhDs, that are capturing some of those stories. I hope one day that we're able to translate that information, the work that our scholars have done, um, into something that can exist outside the classroom. Because right
mm,
now, most of that is only accessible if you are in a school that has a class like that, or if you have access to some of these Pacific scholars that are professors across the country. I can say that it's something that we're trying to do in community. We're trying to
mm,
also like embed some of those narratives and build it out through the work that we do as community. I know for me, learning about the different migrations of our different communities to the US was through developing a leadership curriculum for Pacific Islander college students for a program that we built out in our work. Um, and I learned a lot about, for example, like the influx of Samoans and Chamorros to this country was really around like post-war, right? Post
mm,
World War One, post World War Two is really tied to militarism. And of course that makes sense with the presence that the U.S. military have on our islands, particularly American Samoa, and Guam. And I know for the Tongan community, that migration was on the backs of Black and other communities of color who were fighting for rights through the civil rights movement, um, that ended up reforming immigration policy in the 1960s that opened up more migration, including those of Tongans here in the mid to late 60s. It was because of
mm,
immigration reform. um, I learned all that stuff in community. I didn't,
mm,
there's nobody teaching us those things. And so when you think about narrative and what is necessary for us to build and own our own narrative, um, that's work that is still emerging. It's still emerging work, that's happening in community, and also a lot of times like happening in community in collaboration with our scholars. So
mm,
that's something that's happening, but it is also happening because the dominant narratives that are told about our people are based on those stereotypes, right? Like
right,
everybody thinks that you're an athlete, everybody thinks that you know how to dance or
right,
you know how to sing,
mm,
because unfortunately it is a narrative that is being told through dominant culture, but
mm,
many of our own people perpetuate those same stereotypes. And not that they're wrong, right? Like there's some elements of it that are true, but that is not our entire story. That is not
mm,
all we are. And so part of the, like I do work around narrative building, narrative change work. Part of what we're trying to do is how do we shift the narrative that we internalize about ourselves,
mm,
um, and then begin to formulate a more aspirational narrative that is based in our culture, that is based in our values, so that we can add to the different dimensions of the stories that are being told about us here in the U.S.
Mm. Yeah, let's since you did mention that, let's talk about AsianAmericanFutures.org. How did you get involved in this? Again, those essential parts of the American narrative. Where do Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders fit in? We know the AAPI label or classification. I mean, that in itself is very complex, and I know you have an opinion on that. Please share. But AsianAmericanFutures.org, yeah.
Yeah, so I've only been there for about a year. Honestly, I came into the organization, and I know people are like, it's called Asian American Futures. What are you doing over there?
Mm,
But I came because one of my good friends recruited me over, and I had been I was my previous employer was University of California, Los Angeles, and I was helping to build out a Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander data policy lab there. Um, but I got recruited over because, oh well, one of the reasons why that I went over there was as we are coming out of COVID, and our community was like severely impacted by COVID, at least here in the US. I'm not sure about other countries, but other diaspora communities. And so there was, during COVID, our community was very visible because we had the highest death rates and the highest
wow.
infection rates of any other racial group. I can say for sure in California, but also in most other states where we have large populations. And so it was one of the it was the first time, at least in my experience, where our community was so visible. And so with that visibility, we got a lot of resources through government funding to be able to address and provide support to our communities. And so there was an influx of funding into a lot of our nonprofits. In fact, we have a lot of new organizations now because they were started during the pandemic. And as we were coming out, well, we're not really out of the pandemic, really, but as
Mm,
we were coming out of the pandemic, you could see almost immediately that funding going away.
no.
And that was really sad to me because finally during the pandemic, we were saying, oh, you finally see us. The reason why we're in this situation is because we have been underinvested in, right?
Mm,
So if you would have invested in us, in our infrastructure as a community earlier, we probably would not be so severely impacted right now. But now that we have your attention, invest in our communities. But some of that went away so quickly as things started to open back up. And I got really fearful for so many of our community leaders. We had a lot of young leaders that entered, like the not for NGO or
mm,
nonprofit work, because a lot of our young people just wanted to contribute to what was happening. So we have a lot of young leaders that came into the work, and I was really concerned about our ability to sustain work that we had built during the
mm,
pandemic and organizations that we had started to support during the pandemic. And so I came into this job because one of the areas of work that Asian American Futures does currently is grant making. So really like innovating investments.
mm,
And so I was really interested in coming into this job because I wanted to learn more about the funding ecosystem and to also expand my own network in philanthropy so that I could have a direct connection to where the money is and bring it back
mm,
to the community. It's really what I was interested in was learning the funding world so that I can be an effective advocate for better investments and long-term investments in our community. And then the other area of work for Asian American Futures, there are two other ones: power building and narrative change, narrative power. I had always really thought about like how interesting work in narrative would be. Just understanding the way that we do work in the community, like you have to shift people's minds in order for them to be open to change,
Mm,
to things that, to even like being uh, open to education or new information. Um, and so I always knew how important it was to, like, if we could shift the paradigm in our community in certain ways, then it would be easier for us to push our community forward.
mm,
And so I was always really interested in, like, how do you do that? How do you shift people's minds in a different direction from like what we just settle into? So that was another reason why I came into the organization. Was I saw it as an opportunity for me to learn about what does narrative work look like. And
mm,
so, coming in, I feel really lucky because I actually oversee our grant making work. And I am currently leading a narrative research initiative focused only on our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community. The other really important piece about our work in AAF is our target audience is Gen Z millennial.
mm,
And so it's looking at, like, how do we form a narrative that is powerful for our young people so that a future could look different.
mm,
So I was really interested in those elements. And but really, the biggest interest for me coming into this job was I wanted to learn about the funding world and how money moves and how decisions are made about what foundations invest in. And I wanted to build a larger network so I can bring in more funding for our work.
mm. I was just thinking as you were sharing that AANHPI, when it's lumped together like that, especially with funding and grants and the work that you do, the narrative work there, it must be quite frustrating, right? Because you've got Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander. Like how, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
how do you
it's
navigate those spaces when you are, um, it's not to belittle another story or another experience, but you are advocating for our people. Where do you find the balance, or where do you find the right language to, I don't know, like
yeah,
move in those spaces without offending, really just understanding we're all at this table and we're all trying to take or access resources or lack thereof,
yeah,
limited resources.
yeah. It's not always easy. Well, obviously, if it was
Mm.
easy, it would have been done already. um,
Yes.
um, I've been, some of my mentors are Asian American women,
Mm,
um, and I think there's, I don't know if balance is the right word, but there are opportunities to
mm,
build a community with Asian Americans,
mm,
particularly those that are interested in being in solidarity with Pacific Islanders. And like they are likely people that want to learn more about our community and take the time to get to know our community and come to our events and come and support. And so there are always opportunities to build with other advocates outside of our Pacific Islander community, even just to strengthen the work that we do. The tension that comes from that label itself is because of um, general use of the label itself
mm,
to mean Asian Americans, right?
mm,
Like, more often in Asian American space, you will hear them say API, as just it has been normalized for them to say API to feel more inclusive, even though what they really just mean is Asian American.
Mm.
They say API and they're not even aware that they're also supposed to mean the PI part. But a lot of them, it has been normalized. That language has been normalized. So they will say API, but not really mean PI in that. And so that's a tension point that I know, like that's a narrative that we every
Yeah, it's
May
coming. It's coming.
we're bracing ourselves for the same conversation.
Yeah.
But that's one of the tension points is it's like this normalization of the term to mean just one community. And in that normalization, some of our API organizations have also used the label to only just mean, like they don't even serve Pacific Islanders. And so they use it to just mean Asian Americans. Or the other more cynical perspective is some API organizations use the PI because the data tells a story of need. But when they get the resources for it, because they oftentimes they use Pacific Islander data to justify the ask for resources because there's great need. But then when resources come in, they no longer are thinking about how the Pacific Islander part is being served, or they will be good enough with it's in the language of the flyer. They just didn't show up, right? Like we tried to recruit them, but nobody came. And we often tell API organizations, our people don't come to API space because they feel like they don't feel like they belong there. So they'll never go to an API specific organization expecting to have their needs met there. They don't identify with it. So that's that's probably like that's the more cynical perspective. Is like some people use API, so they use the PI story data to get resources that they then really use to sustain their work and then perform that they are actually trying to serve Pacific Islanders. Or they will, one of my colleagues was just telling me a story about this very situation. They'll come and say, oh, we have this program, but we don't have any Pacific Islander participants. Maybe you can partner with us and help to bring some Pacific Islanders into our program. And oftentimes we think, well, why would we bring our people into that if do you even know how to serve them? Right? Like they're going to feel marginalized in that space. Do you have Pacific Islander staff? Most of the time, no, they don't. And then turn around and say, but do you have a group that can come and perform at our gala?
Right.
So and those things still happen. So which is why we have this conversation every May. Every Heritage Month, we have this conversation. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, because I mean, I feel like it's one thing to navigate those spaces, but it's also, I'm always thinking about protocols, cultural protocols, etiquette, from both sides, the Asian American side, but then Asian American is lumping lots of other different cultures in there. Like it's not just one type of Asian American. And I feel like from the Pacific Island side, in terms, we are all diverse cultures. We are diverse peoples. We all have our histories and experiences, our narratives, but it's sharing space is not as easy. Like the examples that you've shared, it's not as easy as here's a flyer, let's come together, break bread and do that. Like it really isn't, because you really have to think about the language that you're using. Like how does one share in such a space? I last year went to an API educators space. I was so excited and actually met a Fijian international educator there. But to be honest, after we were just talking about, well, what was the PI part of that? I was absolutely stoked to see someone that we can share stories, but I was feeling really like not included. And although I've continued to get emails about it, I've just been like, please don't, because it's just, I don't know. Yeah, it's just even expression like we just cannot be lumped
Yeah.
together. Uh, yeah, it just
Yeah.
people say it's so easy, but it's not.
Right. And I think to answer your question more I guess a little bit more precisely is the way I navigate it is I build relationships. Right.
Mm,
And I don't build relationships with everybody. I build relationships with people that I know are gonna stand by our community. That is like, what did the kids say now? That stands on business, whatever they say. You know, so I there are a lot of those people too in the Asian American community. There are people who are very aware and are wanting to learn and wanting to be good comrades and want
mm,
to stand by our work. And so I think that we have as Pacific Islanders, like one of our gifts is our ability to build relationships. And I always tell our folks that like we're so good at this, use it. Um, and so I build relationships because to me, it's not about, oh, you're just, why do you have to go and, why are you coddling them? To
mm,
me, it's about there are not enough of us in this country already. Like we're a very small community here. I am interested in other people that are not Pacific Islander who want to expand our reach, our visibility. And if they can be in community with us in a meaningful way and they can carry our voices and causes outside of these spaces that we're not in, it expands our ability as a community. So, and there are a lot of those folks. There are
mm,
there are folks like that that also end up holding other Asian American organizations accountable
mm,
for their inability to deliver for Pacific Islander communities. They become external advocates for us because there are not many of us that can be in all of the spaces that are necessary for us to be in. And so then through our relationships, they are able to be advocates for us out there
mm.
and be able to come back and say, hey, I was in this meeting, I mentioned your organization to this person, and they'll be reaching out to you. So I think like we are so good at relationship building. It's a great tool to use to navigate some of these really complex spaces.
Mm. Always opportunities to learn, to educate one another, alongside sharing stories and sharing difference, celebrating, similarities and so forth. So, I mean, we keep talking about community building and this work, these different hats that you have worn over so many years of experience. You have experience in health equity, leadership development, as mentioned, coalition building, policy advocacy, community organizing, as we've said, capacity building, organizational development, and research. Um, you're a champion for leadership and mentorship opportunities. Uh, Again, advocating for advancing the rights of Pacific Islanders in the US. You've been involved in generational wealth building. Uh, with all of this, these moments in time or these parts of your journey, how do you keep building? How do you keep going? Because, when I was researching you, I thought, oh my goodness, when do you sleep? When do you breathe? When do you have time to pause? Because this advocacy work is not easy. And I know it's easy to say, oh, it's not easy, but there are just so many complexities and layers to what you do, to how you turn up to the table of decision making, how you turn up to the narrative work. I mean, absolutely amazing and inspirational. You don't need me to tell you that, really. And I hope that people continue to tell you that,
Mm.
Alisi. But how do you keep going? Yes, I know you're for the people. Absolutely. 200%. How do you keep
Yeah.
turning up?
um, Thank you for, I was like, gosh, they're doing too much. Um, but thank you for the question. I am absolutely unhealthy. It's a it's a it's something that I'm trying to work on as I am getting older and more, and like health issues are more pronounced. For example, uh, doing all of those things has not been the healthiest thing for me. I was just talking to a colleague earlier, and I was like, I am so burnt out right now. Um, but being in community with, like 20 leaders in this region is almost like medicine. Like
Mm.
it's terrible. I have an addiction problem. I know I don't get enough sleep because I'm always taking on way too much. But when I'm in community and it gives me a glimpse of like what is possible, I come right back into it. And it's, I don't really sleep. And ask anybody that knows me. I love sleep, but I don't sleep enough. Uh, I'm trying not to have a 4 a.m. bedtime. That is my normal bedtime, is like 4 o'clock in the morning. And
Wow.
but I intentionally don't schedule my first meeting until after 10 o'clock, right? So I at least get like 4 or 5 hours of sleep. But even that, like, I'm 47. I should be sleeping more. Like, that's not enough. I could do that in my 20s, no problem, but
Mm.
not right now. I want to sleep. So now this year, I've been going to sleep at 2 o'clock in the morning, which is earlier.
A little bit, just a tad bit better. Wink, wink. Yeah, crazy.
so so I'm trying to work on it. Like I used to be physically I used to be healthier. I used to run marathons, and
Wow.
so I used to like train all year round. And that stopped with the pandemic because I didn't have any races to train for, and then I broke my ankle. And and it's something that, like, in my mind, I need to go back to, because then I was like, oh, I don't, because now I have more time on the weekends. I don't have to go do any long runs. So then I just do more work. So it's there's no balance right now, and I'm trying to find it. I'm just being completely honest. I don't want to glorify the fact that, like, I have this list of things that I know I do, and that, like, oh, I'm perfectly healthy and doing everything right. Sometimes I work from home. One really joyful part of my life right now is that I moved back home to my parents, and
Mhm.
they're in their mid 80s, and I get to be an adult at home with my parents. I don't have kids of my own. And so I get to work from home, which is really cool. So, I wake up, and sometimes I hop right into meeting, and then I realize at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, like, oh no, I didn't even eat yet.
Oh.
That's not healthy. That's absolutely not good. And I remember even like just last summer, that's not too long ago, I I made time to make breakfast every morning. So I'm trying to figure out a way to do less. The pandemic definitely piled a lot of things on, because of how much experience I've had in community. I was being called on to do a lot, and
Mm.
I do not say no to anything, which is another terrible thing. Is I say yes, and I find a way to do it, and even if it means that I don't sleep, which has also led to, like, a more pronounced heart condition.
Mm.
So, like, sometimes I used to love pulling all nighters, like my brain just goes, but I can't do it much more now because then I end up having heart palpitations. So, so I'm not healthy in that regard. I think I'm healthy compared to our general Pacific Islander population, but I'm not healthy for myself. And I'm trying to find the right balance for that. I feel really lucky I have a community around me of, like, aunties that are
Mm.
older than me, right? Like, they're aunties, but I work with them really closely, that support me, that and not just them, but like a lot of our other community leaders in other parts of the country are always checking in on me. So they remind me, like, make sure you take some time off, make sure you rest. So that support system is really beautiful. My parents are really great about like reminding me, like, oh, we don't have anything this weekend. Just don't worry about anything. Just make sure you rest. So I at least have a support system for that. Because I think because they know how unhealthily unbalanced my life
Mm,
is with work, because I don't have kids, because I don't have a partner to pour any, I
mm,
just pour all of my love and my care and all of my energy into the work. So
mm.
it's
I'm glad to
not
hear that.
healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to hear that you do have people who love and support the work that you do, but also the personal side of that. The physical, the emotional. I'm just happy to hear that you have people who check in. I'm making a note. Chicken on Alisi. Chicken on Alisi. I'm making a
I
note on
love
my
those.
phone.
I
Like,
love those. And, like even some of our young people that I've worked with over the years will like drop me a line and just be
mm,
like, hey, just want to say hi and make sure you're okay. Like, I think they all know. And I always really, really appreciate that kind of like care.
mm,
And it's also like a check for me. Like, yeah, slow down. Like, you're almost 50. Slow
mm.
down.
Take
Um,
care of yourself. You're too
yeah.
way too important. Loved by many for this advocacy work, for your passion for others, for our community. You're super important and too important to not be looking after yourself. Reminder, chicken, chicken. Um, it made me think about, you know, again, going back to the work that you do, the emotional strain, the physical strain of it. Like, how do you deal with, uh, like, trust building in our Pacific Island communities there? How do you gain and build that trust? Because again, it's something that you would think, I'm a Pacific Islander, it is easy, but there's so much work that goes into that, so many layers.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, trust is like the most important.
Mhm.
Um, what how do people frame this? You know how like you have like social capital, like trust is the it's the currency
Mm.
for this work. And it, like any other community, right? Like there are dynamics, there are relationships that exist in our own Pacific Islander space, that requires for you to build really long lasting relationships that are, um, founded on trust.
Mm.
And the what I have learned, what I have learned over the years in our spaces, protocol goes a long way, because cultural protocol, is a way is another expression of our respect for other people, our respect for our culture, for land, for space, for ourselves even. And so your ability to observe and integrate protocol in the work, is important to showing that you can be trusted in community, in work, because the space will change. But if you are able to observe protocol, um, that goes much farther. You don't just practice it in one space and then not others, but the spaces change, the protocols stay the same. So, for example, I say protocol, people are like, "What the hell are you talking about?" Something as simple as when somebody asks me, "Hey, do you have so and so's phone number?" Um, most if I usually I do, and then I'll say, "Yeah, let me get back to you," and then I'll check in with the
Right.
other person, and say, "Hey, so and so is doing this, and I think they're interested in talking to you. Is it okay if I share your number with them? Um, and then it's up to them to say yes or no, right? Like something simple like that. That
Mm,
in like in outside cultures, it might just be like, oh yeah, here's a phone number.
right.
Um, but for us, like I, like I want to protect people's space and their
Mm,
energy, and I don't want them to just get a random call from somebody that they didn't expect. So things like that, some things as simple as that.
mm,
Um, so is a tool that you can use to build and establish trust and ensure to other people that you have a way of practicing respecting their space, respecting their privacy. And so that's what I mean, like knowing what those things, what the protocol is, and being able to exercise it is a good way of demonstrating that like you have some standard of
mm,
operation for being able to like respect other people. I think the other piece is like transparency.
mm,
um, when people feel like you might be hiding something or being shady, like they're going to question everything you say, everything you do. And so the transparency is really important, in every in all of our spaces.
mm,
I know that like being unapologetic is a thing. I think that has its space, but having an ability to apologize, it
mhm,
goes a long way, right? I know a lot of people probably don't agree with me on that, but I know for me, if I can help ease somebody else by offering an apology, even if I don't feel like I necessarily did anything wrong, but I don't know. Or sometimes I'll just like, I'm sorry, can we start again? Like I
mm,
think ability to like be vulnerable in a way that offers space um, offer space of openness,
mm,
it goes a long way in being able to build trust. So, even when you do a lot of those things right, you can always just expect that there will always be the folks that will be critical, that will not ever trust you. And I think what I've learned over the years is I need to learn to just be fine with it. It's okay. Like not everybody has to agree or like or want to be around me, right? Like that's okay. Um, but yeah, that's what I think I have to
mm,
that's what I think I have to offer around like the issue of trust, because it's so our the hierarchies in our community sometimes like need to be observed, and sometimes like it doesn't need to be there. You need to
mm,
know how to discern that, a lot of times, for example, when we go to conferences and like we have like a couple of elders there, I already know, being kind of in the middle generation, that when I was younger, I made sure that I was practically following them. Like, do you want, like, I'll get you coffee. Are you warm? I'll
mm,
get you your food. Do you need anything else before I go hang out with my own age group? And so I try to pass on some of those things to a lot of our younger people. Like when our elders are here, pay attention to what they need. Like the same thing you would do
mm,
for your own grandma at home. Like this is what we do for our elders in this space. Like this might not be necessarily a Pacific Islander space, but anytime our elders are
mm.
around, like we need to know to observe those things. I think some of those cultural things are still very, very, very important.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that aspect of the that story of following your elders and seeing what they need. It really made me think about your work around mentorship and building up these future leaders in the community spaces that you are moving in and working in. Um, yeah, super important. It made me think about my first experience here with the Samoan. There's a Samoan embassy here
Mm,
in Tokyo, and you know, being brought up the way that I was brought up, um, when you're at a function and there are dignitaries. Well, in this case, the ambassador was there with her husband. It was a barbecue to celebrate Independence Day, And for the life of me, I just couldn't figure out why people were not setting up a table for them. Putting it was just this whole, oh, we're in Japan, this is what we do. But for me, I really struggled with that. So me being me, I went and got some, not the plastic paper plates, but got proper plates, proper cutlery. It didn't matter to me that they may not even sit there, that they might be roaming around chatting to our Samoan community. But in the back of my mind, my auntie was like, "You know better, Losa." It's when you share that story, that knowing those protocols, it reminded me of that. And people were just like, Losa, you don't have to, it's just, we're here in Japan, it's a little bit different. I was like, my aunties would be turning in their graves right now. It just, and so when we have these gatherings, I really just, I just kind of want to be like, just because we are in a different country, we cannot forget, our
Yeah.
culture, the way we do things.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they don't sit at the table, yeah, okay, whatever. But the point is, we should still do it to acknowledge and respect for the ambassador. I mean, that's my whole thing. I was thinking about that when I was like, oh, sis, yes. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I think by the way, I love that you live in Japan. I just dream about those kinds of things. But, when we're in diaspora, and especially for the generations that are born outside of our home islands, I'm lucky I was born in Tonga. But, when you're in diaspora and we feel so disconnected from our culture, and this is something that I'm hearing a lot from our Gen Z millennial, especially like younger generation, is like they feel such a hunger for culture, to learn the language, to practice
Mm,
it. But these are ways that you practice it, right? Like knowing that there are people who hold a lot of responsibility for our community that are going to be in our midst. Like
mm,
you practice, there are so many opportunities for us to practice our culture. Practicing culture isn't limited to learning how to dance. Practicing culture is knowing what you're supposed to do for an elder in space
mm,
that is not necessarily Pacific Islander, right? Like these are opportunities for us to, when we say that respect is a core value, these are opportunities for us in diaspora to practice respect. Is these kinds of ways that, like, if we were back in the islands, or if we were within our church community or within our family, we automatically like behave in those ways, right? Like we automatically do that. Why do we not automatically do the same things even in spaces that it is not Pacific Islander, but is made up of other Pacific Islanders?
mm,
I used to do one of my mentors is African American, black, strong black woman. Learned a lot from her, but I also did the same things for her, right? Like I carry her purse to the car, but and she used to just be like, "You don't have to do those things," and I'm like, "Listen, this is cultural. Like I know that like I know you're my boss, but like when you have to use a cane and then like you have to hold your purse, like there are endless ways for us to continue to practice our culture
mm,
even outside of space that is Pacific Islander. It is a way for us to continue to perpetuate and practice culture that doesn't have to necessarily only happen when you're around your own people. And so, yeah, I definitely like weave that into the work that I do, and
mm,
I try to embed that into, if there are other young people that are new to the work, or I remind them, like, remember that you do this at home, right? Like we
mm,
still do the same thing here. That just because we're in Washington D.C., that doesn't go away for us. We continue to
mm,
practice our culture in that way. And I hope that other people also see that, like the opportunity for us to continue to practice the culture in real life in that way.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I was researching, what really always stood out as I was listening to podcasts that you've done, when I was reading interviews, researching about you and the work that you've been involved in, is this, it's always going back to how firmly grounded you are in your Tongan culture, in your cultural values. Like that, every time I looked you up, I was like looking, researching, it always came back to that. Like that is such a huge part of the work that you do. Um, so important. Uh, just and I think that speaks volumes. That is a testament to who you are, uh, the audiences that you are in front of, the communities that you speak to or listen to, the communities, the people, the leaders, the mentors that you share space with, whether it be educational, personal, cultural, um, Asian American spaces, Native Hawaiian, Pacifica. I mean, it just again, it's a testament to what you stand for. Yeah, what is at the core of the work that you're doing, and it's absolutely, it's phenomenal. I just want people to know who you are, and I don't get me wrong, I'm pretty sure you are very famous where you are, but I want
I'm
people
not.
outside of the US. I want them to know, and I know that you do community building outside of America as well, with our kainga whānau, ainga from all different parts of the globe, Pacific Islanders all over the place, which I absolutely love. So that's just me saying, I see you, we see you, and this is again giving you your flowers. Just if people are not already giving, and I'm sure they are, I'm sure you are loved. We know you are loved. So just just again a reminder that you are important and the work that you are doing is important, and I love that. Everything at the core of that is your kainga, your values, and the seeds that your parents planted in you, not directly at you, but you were hearing as you were, growing up, in your formative years. Those have come to fruition through the work that you're doing, through the networking.
Lately, there has been an attack on the DEI work that had been put in place because of like a lot of the racial awareness,
Mm,
because of like the uprisings that have happened. And so I'm not sure if that's happening in the rest of the world, but here in the US, especially with our former president
mm,
running again, it is very scary. And we're coming up on election in November.
mm,
It is scary. It's a scary time. And I also don't want to be uh I don't want to be naive to the fact that either way it goes, it's still a system that does not work for people of
mm,
color, that does not work for the marginalized, whichever person ends up in that position. So I yeah, it's really, I'm bracing myself, and part of what I'm doing in community is I'm starting to push this conversation about like what are we putting in, what strategies are we putting in place in either scenario.
mm,
Because in one scenario, if we maintain the same administration, it's still bad. And so we need to be able to strengthen our community to take care of ourselves and each other, because nobody's going to come save us.
mm,
And especially as these things shift, it feels like our current administration, in the language that they've been using lately, don't
mm,
sound any different from the other administration before, which is a
mm,
scary thing to say in this country. And so for me, what I have really been thinking about a lot, and I think like I might be going through a transition soon that will allow for me to think more deeply about what that is. Like, what are the things that we need to put in place so that if Medicare goes away, right? Like, this is the healthcare
Mm,
system that cares that provides care for our elders. So if they roll back Medicare and they don't continue to fund it, what do we have in place to make sure that our older Pacific Islanders have what they need? Like, if this is thinking that I'm really sitting with right now, and I know it's like only months away, but
mm,
those are the things that are in my mind. Like, if there's an attack on like the school system, like, what do we have in place to continue to support our students so that our parents continue to work? Or, like, if our workers are affected, what are the things that we have in place that can build support for families while they're trying to figure out what else to do? I'm really interested in exploring some of that, and it's hard because you don't necessarily know, right? Like,
mm,
I'm trying to figure out something about a future I don't know, but
mm,
I'm trying to push our leaders here to, hey, like, what are we collectively putting in place? Like, should we try to build out like a food bank? Like, what are we
mm.
doing collectively so that we are not relying on a system that we know is going to be very unstable? Um, but I can't imagine if that's what we're facing here. Like, I can't imagine, especially for you, like working in like international school where are people from different countries, and um, I wonder like what the politics might look like, right, for
Mm.
the different people that you
Yeah,
teach.
I mean, I am pretty certain there are some okay. What advice would you give for young folks who are wanting to get into the work that you are doing? But before you answer that, could you just talk real briefly about the seventh generation? I heard you pop it in, then I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm come back to that. For those who don't know, for those who,
Yeah.
yeah.
I this is terrible. I really should know who, like, what tribe to attribute this to, but this comes from Native
Mm,
American, indigenous kind of philosophy around where we are today and who we are, even as if you think about it at an individual level, are the result of seven generations before us, and the
mm,
dreams and the work and the planting and the nurturing and cultivation that they did in that time has resulted and manifested in what we have, where we are now. And so then our commitment as people, at least, who think about this long term, is understanding that our work isn't something that's going to turn up the outcomes that we want tomorrow or next year, right? And even if there are outcomes for those in the near term in our lifetime, the the work that we're doing is what we hope will be manifested seven generations from now. And so it is a not it's even longer than a lifelong commitment. And so
mm,
it requires not just investing yourself in the work that you get paid to do, but in the way you live your life overall.
mm.
How are you contributing to what you hope will be manifested in seven generations from now? And so for me,
Wow.
like, liberation is a journey, right? Like,
Mm,
is where I would like, and I'm hoping that what I do now will contribute to liberation of all Indigenous people. And um, hopefully shorter than seven generations, but at least like
mm,
the seventh generation will be living in that, is what I'm hoping my work will contribute to. So yeah, so my advice for young people is, this is a long journey. And that's not to say that you should come and stay here if it's not what you want for yourself. And by here I mean community, um, community-based work that are usually through nonprofits, but there are other
mm,
different areas where you can contribute to community. Um, but I feel like a lot of our young people come in with so much enthusiasm, and then they get discouraged when what they hope to see doesn't happen right away. Meaningful and sustained change is done in an incremental manner. So, like,
Mm.
you might be able to shift one small thing, and that's a win, right? But so like it's a long road, and so then you can join for the whole thing, or you can join for different parts of it. You can join now for a short time, go do something else, come back later for a short time. Like, community is always open, and I always encourage young people that I'm in community with to consider coming into community based work as part of their learning journey. You don't have
Mhm.
to be here for your whole life, but the kind of education that you get from being in community is something you will never get anywhere else. And what usually happens is that you end up growing a root at the very least that keeps you in the ground of community, of culture, and that is going to always be valuable and always be meaningful for anybody in their lives. So I have a lot of people that have come in, spent a few years, and then go off and do work in corporate. But you
Mm.
know what happens is that once in a while they'll stop by an event, or they'll send an email to say hi, or we'll have some kind of a fundraiser and they'll stop by and contribute to it. They always have they have a root in community, and that's what I'm interested in. Is I want to build a generation that values our community enough to be invested in it in one way or another in any of their multitude of talent and skills. Maybe it's
Mm.
on a board, maybe it's as a volunteer, maybe it's just showing up to things. But I'm interested in us continuing to practice what it means to be kainga, right? Like,
Mm.
we shouldn't just be kainga because of blood or because of the regions we come from. In diaspora, we should be kainga no matter what. And being in community space is one way to be part of that. So, yeah, I always like, come to community. You're not gonna be wealthy here, but
Mm.
you'll be enriched in other ways that you cannot find anywhere else. So, yeah.
I like that. If a book, I can't remember if I asked you this, but if a book was written about you, what would it be called?
I
That's
don't
that,
know.
that, that's an easy one, right? That's not
That's a
difficult.
hard question. Well, you know what? I'll answer it this way, and I not that I will call it this. I'll probably call it like a Tongan proverb or something.
Mm.
That's really cheesy, but I because I didn't answer your other question, I really like this title, so maybe it's something around this. But one of my favorite books, which almost is like okay, let me not be blasphemous and equate it to the Bible,
I'm
but
nervous
it's
now. I'm nervous.
no, it's like almost a guidebook, right? Like I've read it a few times in different times in my life. It's not even really Emergent Strategies by Adrienne Marie Brown is phenomenal at helping you understand um, that we are all small parts of a bigger thing, and and there is always a pattern towards uh, towards like a collective body, right? Like, we all belong to this collective, and so uh, it's important to focus on the detail of things, because the smallness of everything contributes to the bigger thing, right? So
Mm.
I love um, there's so much there's so much in that book that I'll read it like 2 years later, and then I go, oh, I didn't even interpret it that same way last time.
Mm.
But I love that book. It's kind of like a guide. There's some exercises you can do in it, but it really helped me think about our role in social change,
Mm.
and like, not needing to not always just needing to see the big things, but like focusing on the small things, focusing on the relationship and the connectivity, like some of those really fundamental things that is like at the basis of being human, at the basis of being a person, at the basis
Mm.
of being a community. Like, we really need to like be good at fostering those really small things, because if we can like make those really small things good, then we're more likely to shift the bigger things, to shift the systems. So That's if there's a title that is like similar to emergent strategies, maybe something really nerdy. Like I remember I used to tell my friend that what is there's a physics formula for, oh, now I forgot it. Momentum. The physics formula for momentum, right? P equals mv. And you talk about like mass and velocity, and like in order for us to build momentum, that these two need to both be growing. So maybe it's like something around like some kind of scientific principle, but yeah. I didn't give you a direct answer, but I gave you my book.
I'm so curious about many things, and I love that you brought it back to your educational background. Yes, I get it.
So my friend was like, "Don't ever use that in your presentation. That is so nerdy. Nobody's gonna get it." I was like, "Man, I want to use it."
Yeah, and you cannot push that nerdiness away. That is also another layer to the multitude of, the identities that you bring to the table, who you are. And oh my goodness, I feel like I could talk for hours. I am so even more inspired than I thought. I had done all this research. Amazing person that you are, Alisi. I thought, yo, it cannot get any better than this. But I am even more motivated and inspired as an educator in terms of the work that I need to be doing to be better, to turn up better for our learners, for my learners, doing what we can do at the grassroots level. I'm just blown away by these gems and proverbs that you've shared, and oh there are no words, but I just want to say a huge thank you for sharing space. It's your story is important, and it's just I'm really humbled and blessed that you came into this space to share it on this platform. There are just so many lessons, learnings that you've shared today that I feel will resonate with so many of our people. And yeah, thank you for the inspiration. Thank you for the work that you do. I am not in the US, but I am moved by the work that you have been and are still doing. And like I said, I hope you know that you are appreciated, not just by those who are directly in contact with you in community, but those of us who are watching, learning from outside, from other parts of the world. So I just want to say, keep going, keep doing what you're doing, but most importantly is just to also look after yourself, because we do need, uh, you know, wahine toa. We need people like you. So I'm going to stop there before I get emotional and just say that I will hand it back over to you, Alisi, if you could end the show. I've really enjoyed these proverbs that you've shared. Like, I was wondering if you could share perhaps one more learning or lesson from mom or dad, or maybe even another proverb that has been passed down to you, and really helps to guide you in the many types of work that you are doing. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'll hand it over to you. I'm gonna get emotional, and I can't be doing that. Get a grip, Rosa. Get a grip.
Oh, Rosa, thank you so much for having me. I love the way that you care for people in these conversations and are able to bring light to like who every individual is that you talk to. And so I really appreciate that you also gave me that kind of care. And I really appreciate, thank you so much. And I always feel really hopeful that uh, the future for our community is much brighter with people like you who take care of others in this very kind and thoughtful way. So, thank you for having me on your wonderful podcast. I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm a huge podcast fan. And especially when I was still living in Southern California, I was driving, there's always crazy traffic. And I loved driving because I didn't mind being stuck in traffic so I could listen to podcasts. But I missed all of that now that I'm back home. But and so to have a Pacifica woman who's consistently carried the voices and brought visibility to our own people around the world is so beautiful and so necessary in helping to bring a narrative of who we are as people with richness and people with dimension and depth. And so, thank you for the work that you do to contribute to a narrative of abundance, of who we are as people. So, really appreciate and feel so honored that I get to be on your podcast. And so, if I may share a proverb, and this is so weird. I shared this proverb earlier. Is There's a Tongan proverb, "Hokope fau moi fau," and fau. I'm sure, like you understand this already. Is probably very similar in Samoan, and it's the material that comes from like the hibiscus bark that you usually like use in like weaving or what people call like the grass skirts for dancers. And um, but it's a proverb that speaks to, it's usually used when in a complimentary way when you describe somebody. um, somebody will say "Hokope fau moi fau." It's no wonder that they are like this, is because they come from stock like this and they are continuing that legacy. So it speaks to the origin of it is that, like, I don't know about any other island, but I guess Tongan fishing nets were made with fau. And if there was ever a tear or an unraveling, that you need to not ever use any other material to patch it, that you would use the same material. You use fau to connect it because it's the only way that the strength is maintained in that. Any other material that you would risk, it like unraveling again or breaking again because it's not as strong. So it speaks to identifying or somebody that um, uh, has done something great, that has achieved something great, that carries excellence. And you say that that person is hokope whānau whānau because they are bringing their excellence and they're connecting it to excellence that existed from their own lineage and their own ancestors. And I usually share that proverb to remind our people that we come from greatness, and our greatness in our expression of it, whether it's through work or anything that we do, that it's important for us to express that greatness, because it's a greatness that's necessary to match the greatness of those that came before us, and it is what we will need to lay in place for the next generation to connect to. Um, so it's just a reminder to like continue to be great and continue to live up to like the abundance of our culture and of our people, so that we can continue to match and build a legacy that continues that kind of greatness. So yeah, that's what I'm offering today.